As our last order of business before returning to Omen of the Stars, it's time to cover the final entry in Ravenpaw's manga trilogy, The Heart of a Warrior. The first two entries of this trilogy seem to have told very different stories, with Shattered Peace focusing on the introduction of Willie's group and how they abused their trust to get Ravenpaw and Barley driven from their own home, and A Clan in Need focusing on the Barn Cats helping ThunderClan with their own problem, Blood Clan cats, led by Barley's brothers, Hoot and Jumper, attacking the forest. However, through it all, the underlying arc has always been about Ravenpaw and Barley, and how their trust and relationship are tested as each are confronted with trials and reminders of their past. With the clans away at the lake, this book is the last time we'll see Ravenpaw or Barley for quite a while, so let's see if we can leave them off on a high note. And before I get too far in, this is the manga page I'm redrawing today, as voted on by my patrons. The Heart of a Warrior was released on August 3rd of 2010, a little over 4 months after A Clan in Need, the second entry in the Ravenpaw trilogy, and Fading Echoes, 2 months after Battles of the Clans, and the same day as SkyClan's Destiny. As with most of the mangas, this one was written by Dan Jolie and illustrated by James L. Barry, and it also included an anonymous Aaron Hunter note at the beginning. This one emphasizes to the readers that Ravenpaw is a loyal, brave, and intelligent cat, but that he knows who he is, and would always choose the life of a barn cat with Barley over returning to ThunderClan. His name will be Ravenpaw forever, and he wears it with pride. The Heart of a Warrior has a total speaking cast of 23 cats, the smallest cast in the trilogy, yet the top 5 cats do still only have 89% of the lines, implying there are at least a couple of minor characters who do get a little bit of prominence. This is because, in addition to a couple of key ThunderClan cats speaking, this book incorporates the antagonists of both past entries, which already intrigues me as a way to unify the 3 individual books in the trilogy more than the past mangas have done. We will have to see, though, just how well that integration works, and to do that, I think it's time we jump into the story. 3 days have passed since the defeat of BloodClan, and Ravenpaw and Barley are still in ThunderClan, watching as familiar, to Ravenpaw, life goes on around them. But now, Firestar is fulfilling his promise and going back with them to reclaim their barn. With them, Firestar has also asked Graystripe, Cloudtail, Brightheart, Brackenfur, and Bramblepaw to come help. Ravenpaw and Barley give their fond farewell to Firestar. Barley chooses not to get caught up in a big crowd for full clan goodbyes, but after a cute moment with Squirrelkit and Leafkit, gets one anyway, as nearly everyone in the clan wants to say thank you for their help and send them off with good luck on their own rogue problem. Even WindClan, when they pass, are already expecting them. Deadfoot and his patrol greet them personally, having heard what happened on the farm and wishing them the best of luck in getting their home back. When they finally do reach the barn, they learn that the barn was fixed since the fire, and the clan cats set up camp at an old abandoned building at the side of the farm. They hunt, out of the way of the main barn to avoid getting caught, while Firestar asks Ravenpaw to show him around so they can plot their next move. From afar, they spot Willie and Snapper, who are still demonstrating disrespect for the barn life by attacking chickens and slashing at the dogs. As soon as they leave, Firestar requests a quick look inside the barn, which has been completely wrecked since Barley and Ravenpaw left. The rogues haven't been making new nests when the hay gets stale, and haven't cleared out their dirt either. The 4 cute kittens Ravenpaw once cared for have also grown, and are now playing with a mouse, practicing battle moves on it rather than eating it. Needless to say, Ravenpaw is angry, but Firestar is coming up with a plan, attacking at nightfall with the element of surprise. They have greater numbers and more training, so it should be a nearly guaranteed win. Firestar does check in with Ravenpaw and Barley about whether or not the dogs or chickens will make noise and ruin their plan, but they assure him that the dogs are heavy sleepers and probably won't be an issue, and the chickens actually have a vendetta against Willie's rogues now. With the plan settled, most cats get some sleep before the battle, but Ravenpaw can't. He's nervous, not only about the battle, but about Barley and what he's been through lately. Graystripe and Firestar check in on their old friend, and he admits his feelings, quickly being comforted by them as they promise they'll get he and Barley their home back. When sundown comes, the patrol carefully and quietly sneaks out towards the barn. As they pass the chickens, though, they all begin squawking loudly, and Ravenpaw realizes that, with all the taunting Snapper has been doing, the chickens must have begun to fear all cats. With that alarm sounded, Snapper comes out and spots them, and the patrol is forced to attack immediately. They dash into the barn, and Ravenpaw tries to slash at anything he can reach, hoping he's at least aiming at enemies. As his eyes adjust to the darkness, though, he realizes with shock that there are many more cats here than originally came with Willie, and he even hears 2 cats calling to each other with very specific names. Hoot and Jumper. Suddenly, the male two-leg thrusts open the door, and, considering he is probably shocked to see upwards of 20 cats in the barn, he shoos them all away. With the light in the barn, though, he also gives Ravenpaw a chance to confirm his fears, that cats followed them here from BloodClan. ThunderClan is forced to scatter and meet up at the opposite side of the farm, and Barley is not doing well, particularly now that his brothers are back. Ravenpaw steps in to counter his panic by pointing out that the cats were calling Hoot and Jumper by those names, not Snake and Ice, and they might not think of themselves as BloodClan anymore. If they've lost that confidence, they'll be easier to take down, something Ravenpaw knows well after his experiences with Tigerclaw. But Ravenpaw knows this is his and Barley's home, and that the rogues do not belong here. He just needs Barley to believe it too, so that they can win. The next day, Ravenpaw, Firestar, and Graystripe surveyed the barn and discuss an alternate strategy. When Firestar hears about the holes in the roof that can serve as additional entrances, he comes up with a plan and shares it with the group. As a distraction, they'll send 2 cats to the main entrance and send everyone else silently through the roof to catch them by surprise on 2 fronts. Brackenfur and Bramblepaw are chosen to go to the door, and they even choose to intentionally scare the chickens to get the rogues to the front as quickly as possible, and to mask any sounds the rest of the patrol might make while getting to the roof. When they reach the roof, though, they realize that the holes were patched up when the barn was fixed. So, thinking quickly, Barley and Ravenpaw make a hole! Brackenfur and Bramblepaw shove open the barn doors, letting in the moonlight so no one can hide, and the clan cats get to work. They push the rogues outside, and Ravenpaw takes a particular moment to demand that Willy leave and never return. Unfortunately, Snapper and Pounce call in more reinforcements, and the cats are quickly surrounded and have to fight for their lives. At that moment, the 2 dogs break free of their constraints and dive into the battle themselves, instantly turning the tide. The clan cats are ready to run from the dogs themselves, but Ravenpaw and Barley did save their lives back in the fire, and they haven't forgotten that. Ravenpaw pins Willy down while Hoot and Jumper are cornered by the dogs. They appeal to Barley's relationship with them and also just lie about not knowing that this was his home, and Barley steps in to ask the dogs to leave these 2 alone. Finally, all the BloodClan rogues are driven off, save for Hoot and Jumper, who beg for mercy. Now that they spoke against Willy, they can't return safely to the two-leg place. Barley doesn't really like them at all, but he doesn't want them to die, so Ravenpaw steps in to say he'll make sure they don't cause any problems. After saying goodbye, the clan cats head home, and Ravenpaw and Barley set to work fixing up the barn after the way Willy left it. Hoot and Jumper do not help them. At all. Ravenpaw is happy to be home, but with Hoot and Jumper there, and especially with how much they are trying to be all buddy-buddy with Barley, he can't help being slightly uncomfortable, and he can tell Barley is too. He gives his friend a chance to go out for a walk to calm his mind, while he shows Hoot and Jumper around to all of the places where they can get different resources and help themselves. However, through it all, they don't seem to want to do anything, instead expecting that everything be done for them. After an exhausting day, Ravenpaw takes a quick nap and is awoken by Barley, who points out what a wreck the barn has suddenly become. Hoot and Jumper complain that they were trying to hunt and that Ravenpaw should have showed them how, which he obviously did. When Ravenpaw protests, though, Hoot and Jumper whisper something in Barley's ear, and he pads away. They told him that Ravenpaw got Hoot and Jumper to collect everything while he took a nap, and while Barley doesn't believe Ravenpaw had any ill intentions, it's true that Ravenpaw is exhausted and did take a nap. From that point on, Hoot and Jumper are even more insistent on emphasizing their relationship with Barley and taking him out with them alone, and Ravenpaw becomes increasingly frustrated with them, in particular as they start ordering him around and taking his nest. When Barley doesn't step in, Ravenpaw becomes worried that this is what he wants, that there isn't a lasting bond between them because they aren't clanmates or related by blood, and even considers leaving and finding a new place to live. But thankfully, those worries are quickly put to rest. He comes back the next day to find Barley screaming at his brothers for being lazy, worthless piles of manure and for treating Ravenpaw like dirt. He demands without hesitation that they get out, declaring that blood isn't everything. Loyalty is, and Ravenpaw has been more loyal to him than they could be in 100 lifetimes. Hoot and Jumper get pompous, saying that Barley couldn't really drive them out because of how strong and skilled they are. But Barley jumps in to claw at them and say he's just as strong as them, being kin and all. Hoot and Jumper tried to deflect by saying they never liked living here anyway, and Barley sends them off with nothing but pity. They don't have love or loyalty for anyone, and they have nowhere to belong. it's probably only a matter of time before they even turn on each other. They have nothing to respond, and simply leave. Barley apologizes to Ravenpaw for not doing this earlier, having wanted to believe that they would change, but he promises that this is their home, no one else's, and even takes them up to the roof so they can survey their own territory, the farm that is finally just theirs again. And that is where we end. I have some mixed feelings on this book, but overall I consider it to be a solid finale to the Ravenpaw trilogy. It certainly contains conflicts that I understood more than those in Shattered Peace, along with plenty of characterization and interactions that helped the book to flourish. In particular, I was very impressed by how connected this entry was to the rest of the trilogy. In both previous manga trilogies, while there has been an overall through line of leaving the two-leg place and finding the clans, or working through a relationship with and fallout from a relationship with Tigerstar, they each had at least one massive element that seemed to only last for one entry before being forgotten. Graystripe and Sasha both had their second entries almost entirely dedicated to evolving relationships with particular two-legs, which I loved, but both of those plotlines can come off as filler since they are dropped after those books and not brought up again in the third books. Meanwhile, now that we have the whole Ravenpaw trilogy to look at, each part of this story feels like it follows directly from the previous one, and there aren't any plots or elements exclusive to one entry. In fact, the Heart of a Warrior in particular unifies the first two conflicts even more by having Willie's and Hoot and Jumper's groups of BloodClan cats joined together, and showing that they were communicating before. Ravenpaw and Barley's internal, external, and interpersonal conflicts across all three entries have been surrounding the same elements: Ravenpaw and Barley's exile from their home by BloodClan cats, relationship with each other and their pasts, and worries over their own identities in relation to those pasts. As a result, even though there is an individual manga outside the Ravenpaw trilogy that I like more than any individual entry in this one, Warrior's Refuge, the Ravenpaw trilogy is my favorite manga series so far. It's very cohesive. On its own, The Heart of a Warrior also has a lot of good qualities. There's a prevailing sense of relief and finality to it, from the large, warm goodbyes with ThunderClan and even WindClan, to the conversations the original Firegrey Raven trio get to have, to the final rejections of Barley and Ravenpaw's pasts, to the peace Ravenpaw and Barley get as they look out over their home, safe and together at last. It makes sense because Ravenpaw was a really, really popular character, despite essentially only being there for the first book of the first arc, and his and Barley's relationship was being speculated about for 3 years prior to this manga's release. However, the clans moved to the lake, away from them, in 2005, and we even said goodbye to them for the last time chronologically in Graystripe's manga in 2007. By release order, this is the last time we will see Ravenpaw or Barley for the next 5.5 years, and at the time the Aarons were writing this book, they probably didn't think we'd ever see them again. It seems appropriate, then, for this to feel like a climactic and peaceful farewell to such a beloved pair of friends, not just for the cats in the story, but for the readers as well. I also continue to love the connection that Ravenpaw and Barley have to their home. They not only know every tail length of the farm and buildings on it, but care about their memories of it, being happy to see the barn fixed up to the way they remember it before the fire, and sad to see their old familiar holes were closed up with it. They still enjoy taking walks through it to calm down and sort through feelings, and even through his frustration over Hoot and Jumper, Ravenpaw enjoys showing off all the different little areas of the farm that they use for different things. It's not just the place itself either. Ravenpaw and Barley both care about the two-legs, chickens, and dogs that live with them too. They were confident that the chickens, who had always trusted them, would stay calm, and you could see the hurt in their eyes when they realized that Snapper had lost them that trust. Even better, they remember how they saved the dogs during the fire in the first book, and are pleasantly surprised to see that the dogs do remember that deed and break themselves out to save Ravenpaw, Barley, and their friends in turn. Ravenpaw even mentions how he'll keep in mind in the future that the dogs really do remember and care about things. This is what home really is and feels like. It's when you're familiar with and even nostalgic for every blade of grass, every creature, every routine you can find there. It's where you can relax, as well as those you can relax with. Speaking of, Ravenpaw's understanding of Barley in this book, especially following their trials and tribulations in the first two entries, is another of my favorite elements here. Barley isn't as talkative as Ravenpaw is, and feels particularly uncomfortable speaking in and working with crowds he isn't familiar with, and Ravenpaw knows this. Throughout the book, he keeps a constant lookout on his friend for any moments where he may need help expressing his feelings, stepping away, processing his grief, or otherwise, and he provides that help. and even, often, a translation of sorts into words that Firestar and ThunderClan can understand. They really have become good partners, growing even closer and more cohesive through their experiences in this trilogy. They're still friends, and nothing in these books implies that they're more than that without fandom headcanons, but they are very, very good friends, and clearly make a great match. However, there is one last test they have to that relationship in this book, and it is honestly the element I have the most reservations about: the actual plot. The first 63 of the 108 pages in this book cover the battle against Willie's large Bloodcling group as they're driven out of the farm. And all of that is well-written planning and action scenes with several nice character moments thrown in. However, what I remembered this book for before rereading it was instead the last 30 pages or so dedicated to Hoot and Jumper, and their intrusion on Ravenpaw and Barley's newly reclaimed life. Obviously, Barley hanging out with the new rogues while Ravenpaw is left out is a role reversal of the first book, where Ravenpaw was hanging out with the new rogues while Barley was left out. And in addition, this is the final element Barley had to clear on his own backstory. It was a plot point that needed to be addressed. However, I don't see enough justification on Barley's side to always explain his actions. He says at the end, once he's driven them out, that he was hoping they had changed, but this isn't something alluded to before. Instead, Jumper and Hoot's dishonesty and clinginess was obvious, and even Barley didn't really want to take them in. He just didn't want them dead because they do have some relation through blood. That sort of relationship may justify agreeing to go on a walk with them, even if it leaves Ravenpaw out for a night. But it doesn't justify believing their lies over your best friend when he says he had nothing to do with wrecking your barn and that he taught them all they needed to know to hunt and do chores themselves. It certainly doesn't justify standing aside watching while your brothers continuously order your best friend around, take his prey and nest, and verbally berate him for fun. The issue, of course, is not that Barley is acting wrongly. Characters always do and should make mistakes. However, the story didn't give me enough of an explanation to show me why he made these mistakes, when they went against other values we know Barley to hold. Even though he is quiet, we have specifically seen him stand up for Ravenpaw multiple times in this trilogy when he was being disadvantaged, as Ravenpaw does for him. So standing aside while his brothers treat Ravenpaw, in his words, like dirt, doesn't make much sense. Now, this treatment didn't last nearly as long as the equivalent in the first book, and Barley is specifically a cat who doesn't speak up often, especially on the spot. Barley also earns a lot of my sympathy right back when he apologizes for his actions right after kicking his brothers out himself and declaring that Ravenpaw is the one who has always been loyal to him. I don't hold any ill feelings towards Barley, but I do have to suspend my disbelief a little further to buy that Barley would have allowed much of this treatment to happen in the first place. And it does leave a bit of a sour tint on an otherwise lovely book. Ravenpaw and Barley have never been my personal favorite characters, but the mangas have proven by now that they can make rich, endearing stories no matter how much you liked a character previously. With the amount of care put into Ravenpaw and Barley, not just their individual personalities, strengths, and flaws, but the way they interact as a pair and the way that their pasts have informed their decisions, I couldn't help but be drawn into their story for almost the entire run. And I was particularly impressed with how conclusively and cohesively they composed this finale. Despite a couple of bumps in the road, this was a beautiful story overall, and makes for a great farewell to our favorite barn cats. Now, as we lay their stories to rest, it's time to set our sights, finally, back on the main series as we re-enter Omen of the Stars when we return for the next episode of our trip through time.